So,
Right, David, back to you. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I was waiting for Elaine to come back while she closes her window.
David. Yes, do you want me to continue with this? The meeting's being recorded, dear.
All right, yes.
Right, I'm going now.
Just one thing, just to repeat what Joe said, please could you mute yourselves? To do that, you go down to the left hand and just cross off your microphone. Otherwise, we'll be getting interruptions and I'll get distracted, which would be terrible. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to talk to you for about a quarter of an hour about Christopher Saxton's county map and his mapping project, and then about how he viewed the parish of Halifax. In fact, I'm going to do it the other way around. We're going to start with talking about a little bit about the parish of Halifax, and just in case there are people who don't know where Halifax is, in the West Riding, the old West Riding of Yorkshire. And on the map on the left there, you can see I've pointed an arrow to it. And I use this map because it really illustrates one of the attributes of the parish of Halifax, is that it is one of the largest in land area, not only in the West Riding of Yorkshire, but it's also one of the largest parish, or was one of the largest parishes in England. And that gives it some special features, although not necessarily any special features that we'll see in this talk this evening. So Halifax there is, as you can see, its borders on the county of Lancashire, and that border is also more or less going through the watershed of the Pennines. Just to give you a few nice views of the parish, first of all, this is a kind of typical scene up near the county boundary. So we're in Pennine Hill country. When you get to the very tops, quite often you just see a plateau. You can see one in the distant background, and where those windmills are, just see them in the murk there. You're more or less on the tops there. And on the tops there, it's an unusual around the South Pennines in that they're fairly flat. So you look as if you're at the top of the hill, and you can see kind of for quite a long way. And then you've got this rolling countryside in front of you, with fairly steep-sided valleys, so on. Coming a bit further down the valley, we're heading eastwards, basically, looking over the Calder Valley. The Calder Valley is going from left to right, is where the wood is in the middle of the picture, and on the nearer side of it is a settlement called Hathershelf. I just happen to live there and happen to have this photo. Documentary evidence takes us back to at least the mid-13th century. The building on the right, which is, you can see a stone building or a group of buildings on the right. One of those actually is a timber-framed house that has been cased in stone, as are lots of the buildings in this area. Then if you go on to the other side of the valley, although in the wood you can actually see Brearley Hall, which will appear on the map. And then behind is the village of Midgley, and then in the far background is Wainstores. And again, you get this idea of the sort of fairly steeply sided valleys and then the fairly flat tops, as you can see over there behind Wainstores. Coming further east down the valley, this is looking back over and looking back up the valley. The valley sweeps round up towards the right of this picture, and that's where you can see the and the hilly tops beyond and the valleys. This is one of the views from Tate's views on the Manchester and Leeds Railway, of course, a long time after Christopher Saxton was viewing the area, but difficult to say how much different it actually was, apart from, of course, the industrial features, the railway cutting through on the left-hand side there. You can see four-lane bridge and the industry down in Sorby Bridge itself. Halifax, though, is possibly better known for its building society, as was, of course, in the good old days, but also it was very well known for its gibbet. And the Halifax gibbet was remarked upon by travellers in the 16th century, and basically this was an instrument used to behead felons, and was used up until the middle of the 17th century to actually dispatch people who were caught stealing, and particularly stealing cloth. And there's just a fine illustration of it, and it's one of the earliest illustrations of Halifax itself, with you can see the parish church there. I think it's more representational than anything else, but the picture of the gibbet is well, we think is fairly accurate, and parts of the gibbet were actually discovered in the 20th century, and the platform has actually been reconstructed and rebuilt appropriately on Gibbet Street. So something to view when you actually go to Halifax, when you come and visit the Peace Hall and some of the other wonderful things. And again, you can see all the hillsides behind, so it gives you an idea of the countryside very much that Christopher Saxton was mapping. The other thing about Halifax in particular is that it became notable in the 16th century, although William Camden was probably a little bit behind with the times when he actually wrote this, that the inhabitants have so flourished by the cloth trade, which they, in the last 70 years, they fell to. They are both very rich and have gained a great reputation for it above their neighbours. And Halifax and the parish of Halifax in the later 15th century and the 16th century was responsible for almost a boom in the textile industry in the West Riding, which dragged the textile production away from the old centres, for example, York and Beverley and Ripon, the towns where the guilds were, and into this rather hilly and unpromising area in lots of ways. Anyway, let's look at what Christopher Saxton made of it. First of all, just a word or two about Christopher himself. Quite a bit is known about him, although there are some tantalizing gaps. He's born in the 1540s. I've said probably in Ossett near Wakefield. There's some dispute about it, and then we're not exactly sure. There's no handy birth certificate or anything like that. But he's certainly, he went to live in a hamlet called Dunningley, which is really between Leeds and Ossett. Really, it's not far from one of the junctions on the M62. If you plough along the M62, it's near the junction where you would turn off for Dewsbury. He was educated at Cambridge, although we don't know which college he was educated to. But he seems to have learnt a substantial amount of his trade as map maker from John Rudd. Now, John Rudd was the vicar of Dewsbury, nearby town, and he's also the rector of Thornhill, which today is really a village in the surroundings of Dewsbury. A polymath, I put for him. He was very interested in map making, and he had actually done some surveying for a plat of England in 1560. There were connections with through him through to William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, and through a court official called Thomas Sexford, who became very important in promoting Saxton's work and in financing him to a certain extent. And what we're really interested in, of course, is the counties of England and Wales and the surveys. They took place in the mid-1570s and produced an atlas. And it's significant. This was really the first atlas that was published of England and Wales. There had been maps of a sort before, but this was really the first county atlas that was actually published. And that is really on which Christopher Saxton's significance really rests, being responsible for this atlas. So let's have a look. Here is the atlas, or the pages out of the atlas for Yorkshire. I've taken these images from the French National Gallery, who have a very good series, and you can view them online. And they are slightly better than the copies we are actually using in the project, which are from Lord Burleigh's own library, originally now held by the British Library. Those, unfortunately, in some cases, you could say unfortunately, I suppose, have been marked by Lord Burleigh. In some cases, very interestingly, what he's done to them. We'll look at that towards the end. But this is these are somehow a much cleaner copy. I'm not sure of the provenance, but anyway, there is the map. You can't really make out very much of it apart from the general shape, and you can see there on the right-hand side we have the Hull and the Humber Estuary, North Sea, and so on. Okay. We're going to focus down into the parish of Halifax itself, and we're going to be looking at this area. So we've come across to the left-hand bottom corner, or the southwest corner of that map, and we'll look at this area within the rectangle in a moment. Just on the left, I want to just point out this rather wonderful coat of arms, which is sitting in Lancashire. This is the coat of arms of Thomas Sexford, who we mentioned a little bit earlier. And as he was promoting these maps, and he was allowed to put his, or Christopher Saxton put his coat of arms on the map to kind of give a bit of ownership, I guess. Okay, now we can see more clearly, I think, that we are looking at the parish of Halifax. The old ancient parish boundary is marked by this bluish line that runs around the edge there, sort of a fairly irregular line. And it stretches, I hope you can see, from, this is the Lancashire border here, up on the side here, on the left-hand side. Woodop Head and Gorple are both well-known areas up in the Pennines. Stipenden is also almost would be a boundary crossing point if it wasn't on such a tiny road. And down here we can just see the start of the name of Blackstone Edge, over which was the main route one, and also a Roman road, a reputed Roman road runs over this as well. We're going to focus in a little bit more so we can talk a bit about the various symbols we can see on that map and get some idea of what Christopher Saxton actually mapped or put onto his map before it went on to the engravers. And here we can see the parish of Halifax, or the central part of the parish of Halifax. There we have the River Calder running here through the middle, and we can work out, you can see several prominent places. The most prominent, appropriately, the parish centre at Halifax. It is the one place you'll notice that has its name in capital letters, and it also, as you'll see, it has a much larger town symbol for it. The other symbols are fairly straightforward. You can see the hills around these, although these are really, again, representative hills. They're not particularly, there's 2 hills there and 1 hill there, for example. We are talking about ranges of hills and areas cut by sharp valleys. The rivers are fairly clear, the streams that go off them, although of course they're not all on there, and the crossing points, and that's one of the most interesting points from the Viae Regiae point of view, because these of course are crossing points. And what's missing, well, there's one pretty obvious omission, is that there's no roads linking up these bridges or linking up the various places, and that's something which Christopher Saxton didn't put on his map, and we might try and consider that if we have a moment towards the end of why not. Okay, on we go. Just a word or two about those symbols that we saw for the settlements. There are a variety he's used. We mentioned town first of all, and that's fairly clear where you have a fairly large settlement. And on the right we have a castle. Well, sadly, I guess in Calderdale, in Halifax, we have no castles, but we do have villages with churches, as we see. This is the symbol here. What we've taken to be a large house, or maybe a manor house, or a significant building anyway here, and then the one for a hamlet here, which is this little, looks like a little single-story building, perhaps with a single chimney. These are all, I think, representative. They don't really try and represent exactly what was there. So well, let's look at 1 or 2 of those in the parish of Halifax. And the first one I've chosen is to tackle this one with a hamlet in it. And let's see what actually that was picking up. Well, it just happens to be the one that occurs most frequently, certainly in the parish of Halifax, and I would guess in Yorkshire itself. And it's difficult to actually pin down what Christopher Saxton imagined, or what Christopher Saxton saw when he decided to call these settlement, or when he decided to depict these settlements in this way. Calling them a hamlet is possibly a bit misleading. What they were groups of buildings, perhaps farmsteads, grouped together, a bit like you saw with Hathershelf earlier on. And I've circled 2 down there on the sort of the southwestern corner there. Both one called Langfield, the other Errington. Well, Errington is a very interesting one. If he'd been here 150 years earlier, there would only have been 1 or 2 farmsteads or settlements on that hillside, because it was part of a huge deer park owned by the Manor of Wakefield. And there wouldn't have been a number of settlements on there, 1 or 2 perhaps. Langfield, a little bit further to the west, is a second settlement. There is actually a place called Longfield, which is on the edge of Todmorden, but the significant settlements in that area are rejoicing in the names of Mankin Holes and Lumbutts, and they are two hamlets there, but as you see, they don't appear on the map. If we move across the map to a little bit to the east, we've got something that is much more represent what we would imagine as to be a hamlet. And you'll notice this one is called Sorby Chapel. Well, it's abbreviated, of course, for Sorby Chapel. And it's very interesting that the spelling today is somewhat different. And people that don't know the area call it Sowerby, and spell it out like that. But the locals call it Sorby still. And that's how Christopher Saxton represented it. But the difference between Sorby and Errington or Langfield and one or two of the others is that this already was a centre of population. There were several, at the time, they would have probably been timber framed houses in the area. And it was a recognised town, as they are called in this area. You don't really call them villages, they are called towns or townships. We can go on to look at the second one of our symbols over here, the manor house or hall or mansion is probably the wrong word for it, but a hall, manor house would be probably the best one for it. In other words, a significant house that stood out for some reason to Christopher Saxton. And this one I've illustrated or circled is Shipton Hall. Now, Shipton Hall may well be a name that you know yourselves from, as it's the was the West Riding Folk Museum, as Shipton Hall now is Calderdale Council, one of Calderdale Council's primary museums. But more importantly, it was the home of Anne Lister, who's been featuring in Gentleman Jack in the television series. Here is Shipton Hall today. As you can see, we've got part of a timber framed, or what appears to be a timber framed house there, with various stone additions on both sides. It did actually probably look more like this, courtesy of the West Yorkshire Archaeology Service, when Christopher Saxton was around with just a timber framed house with a little bit of stonework around it. He also marked a second building down at Elland, and I thought that was very interesting that he'd marked Shipton Hall and he marked Elland, and there are one or two others on the map. I mentioned Brearley Hall, which is a little bit further on when we were looking at that. But Elland here is not only interesting because it's beside a bridge, it also has a park surrounding it, and it's a building which is clearly a mansion. It's called Elland Hall, and it is a building that well, we knew where it was because it stood at the end of Elland Bridge, and here we have an early 20th century picture of Elland Bridge, and there behind it is Elland Hall. Wonderful, you think we can go and visit it? Oh no, I'm sorry, you can't, because in the mid-1970s a bypass was put in around Elland, and it required Elland Hall to be dismantled. And when they started dismantling it, they discovered that inside there was a timber frame. And here is a view from the dismantling of this building in the 1970s with the intention of re-erecting it, but I don't think it ever happened. Okay, let's carry on then. Our next one, the central one there, is the what we've called a village, and I've used Heptonstall here as the best example by far on the map. Although the image itself is quite difficult to see, but there is Heptonstall. Heptonstall stands high above the valley and is a very good vantage point looking down the Calder Valley, and if you get in the right place you can look up the Calder Valley as well, so it's clearly a vantage point. And it was an early township and a settlement and an early chapel. Now, the parish of Halifax, as you've seen, was huge, and it was divided at fairly early stages into chapelries. Elland was one, which we've seen about Elland already, and Heptonstall was the other. And they divided up the 20-odd townships between them and the central church in Halifax. And here is the old church in Heptonstall. Christopher Saxton might have seen something like this. The church has had a few additions to it over the years. In the 1630s, for example, the loft was built. There's another on the other side. The basic difference, though, if you go to Heptonstall today, is that this church is in ruins, and there's a mid-19th century church standing next to it, but this one has been left in the churchyard, and you can still see these graves, or their locations anyway. And it's a very interesting place to go and visit if you have the chance. So our central town, though, our parish town, is the town of Halifax there. Clearly, I've mentioned bridges already. Clearly, Halifax had at least 2 or 3 bridges at this time. Not quite sure why they're not shown. It may be that this the name is blotting them out, but there was certainly a bridge to the north there, and it's curious as to know why that bridge is missing from this particular map. But there we are. That's it's one of those kind of things that you have to think about. Here is a picture of Halifax. There are not, as I said, not too many illustrations of it, but this is Halifax roughly from the northeast as you're coming in from the Bradford direction. On this picture you can see the old North Bridge, and this is the bridge that it was replaced in the mid-19th century by a large iron structure, which in turn is still there, but also the traffic has now been taken onto a flyover, so it's very difficult to see this view. But in the distance you can see the parish church there, and the various houses around it. But this is the mid-18th century, so Christopher Saxton, whichever way he came into Halifax, and he may have come down one of the roads from this direction, would have had a view not too dissimilar to this, but of course you probably have to think away a stone bridge like this and an extensive town around it, pretty much smaller. To get some idea of what the town was like in the 19th century, John Horner did a series of drawings. I think the most interesting thing, for me, I'm interested in old buildings, and it's these amazing timber frame buildings. If you go to Halifax today, you will see just one timber frame building in the centre of Halifax, and not too many of these types standing around either. Just a word too about before I finish, other work by Saxton. He finished his work in the 1570s by putting together a map of England and Wales, and that is a pretty well-known map. He engaged then for the remaining 30 or 40 years of his life in professional surveying and map making, particularly working in 2 areas. One was surveying estates and so on, and the other for providing evidence for disputes and documents that were taken to court. And we are very lucky in the parish of Halifax, and we have 3 examples of that. And I've got an example here that just go through briefly in the Ludden Valley. And I've put a little rectangle on that map of showing roughly where the parish is. You can see there is a village there called Luddington that has now transformed into the 21st century Luddenden. And that area shows the area that Christopher Saxton mapped. And here on the right-hand side is the plan he actually drew up in 1599, and there on the left a plat of the course of Luddenden Brook, with the mill goits taken the same from Luddenden Chapel to Luddenden Foot, etc., and that kind of thing. And that gives you a clue to what we're talking about. We're talking about a dispute over water, which frequently happened in this area, and particularly because we're looking at driving these fulling mills, and the fulling mills, of course, are dealing with the cloth, which is industrial explosion in Halifax, or Halifax Parish has experienced. And you can see Luddenden Chapel at the northern end of the map, and Luddenden Village, and there are other bridges shown there. The Queen's Mill, of course, is called the Queen's Mill because it's under royal patronage at the time, and the Manor of Wakefield has cheated to the Crown at this stage. And then the southern part of the map, and where the real trouble was, the court cases that this map was drawn for rumbled on for a good 10, 12, if not longer. 12 years, if not longer. They ended up in a murder in London, and all sorts of things, and they're fairly well recorded. But we have here at Luddenden Foot a very interesting illustration of the fulling mills. There you can see 2 opposing fulling mills. There were these people, one on this side of the Luddenden Brook, and the one on the other side, who are both competing for the water that was coming down Luddenden Brook to run their fulling mills. Here you'll see Boy Bridge. Boy Bridge is a bridge called Boy Bridge is still there, but it's here. The original bridge was swept away, and Boy Mill is also a well-known site. So you can actually pick these places that Christopher Saxton mapped in 1599 out here today in the 2020, where are we? 2021. Just before I conclude, 2 points about this version of Saxton's map that we're actually using in the project. It's very interesting in that when it got into Lord Burleigh's hands, because all the proofs went to Lord Burleigh and he looked through them, he made some additions to the maps, mainly I suspect for his own use. And one of them is up in the northern corner of northern edge of Yorkshire. You can just see there Darlington, and we're going over here into County Durham. And just on the left, if we'd have been a bit further over, we'd have had Barnard Castle, which has become better known as the base for Specsavers. Off the Tees, he actually drew in a stream that had been omitted here, running right the way through here. And he obviously thought it was important enough to add to Christopher Saxton's map. But interestingly also, he underlined some of the places, and I wasn't at all sure why he underlined these places until I did a bit of digging. And it turns out that the manors of Mansfield and Claubert and Newsom, right over here on the west side of the map, were manors that Burleigh himself actually acquired during the 1570s. So he was marking these as places that I know about. The one other addition he made, and this is the version we have been tagging, you can see the rectangles of the tags. Down here, we have a tag with a name in it. And this is Bowling Hall, just outside Bradford. And it was the home of the Tempest family. And Lord Burleigh is actually noting down on his version of the map why the name of the family who actually hold this particular place. So I've come to an end. We can hopefully now have an interesting question and answer or discussion part. Just before we do, there are just some of the resources that are available. The Viae Regiae website there and the Twitter account, and then some references for the local background and the sources of the map images I've used. There we are.
Excellent. Thank you very much, David. We can all give a virtual round of applause, however you'd like to do that. Really interested in that. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think.
Shall I stop sharing
I know there's
now?
some people here. Yeah, you can. Yeah. I know there's some people here who've worked on the maps that have maybe got some more specialist questions, as well as a variety of historians who maybe this is their first or they've not had too much experience with all kinds of questions. If you've got any questions or comments, you can put them in the chat if you'd like, and I can read them out, or I'm quite happy if no one's speaking, if you want to sort of ask away, really. As I say, any questions or comments that you've got there. I would ask, just while you're all thinking, David, you speculated a bit on that bridge just to the north of Halifax. Do you think that you sort of said it might be because the word was there? Do you think that was forgotten? Do you think it was omitted? Do you think there's a, what would your speculation be in a bit more detail?
In a bit more detail, well, I think it's pretty clear that he only put on some of the bridges. Right. Why he only put on some of the bridges is more debatable. I think partly because this map actually was, or the origins of this mapping project was defensive, and they didn't necessarily want to show all the features on the map. I suspect that, and Peter Barber from the British Library also puts this forward as a theory that they didn't want to give too much information on the maps in case the maps got into the wrong hands. Remember, we're talking about 10 years, 15 years before the Armada, for example. And that doesn't apply to Yorkshire, of course, very much, but
no, I was quite interested by the fact that the French had a copy of the map and it's less used. I don't know if that was just because they were less interested in Yorkshire, or was that the whole series that is in good condition?
I don't know where the French got that version from. I must admit, that's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Has anyone got any questions? Any comments?
Go on, David, far away.
Yeah, sorry, just switching my microphone on. You mentioned that Halifax was a large parish, a very large parish. So obviously they would have needed the chapels of these, so people had somewhere to go. Yeah. Yet some of the chaps, I mean, Sorby you mentioned because it says Sorby Chapel on the map. Heptonstall you mentioned as a chapel, but it's not identified on the map as a chapel. He doesn't seem to have had a symbol to identify those hamlets or villages that had chapels to distinguish them from other outlying places in the parish. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely. It's very inconsistent. I suspect he put on the ones where you could see, well, some that you could see very, very clearly. Heptonstall has got a different, Heptonstall and Elland have got different symbols on. They were the two parochial chapels. And Halifax,
Okay.
of course, has got the parish church. But as you quite correctly say, there are other chapels there which seem to have the different, or places called chapel. And there are several chapels missing altogether from the map. So I not exactly sure what was going on there. But he has admitted, for example, Ludden had a chapel by the 1490s, and indeed it's shown on that very detailed map that I showed you right at the end, but it's not shown on the the county map. So pass. I don't know why, but it's just something I think, from our point of view, from the project's point of view, is something we need to be aware of. Saxton, he's a little bit, I don't know, inconsistent, shall we say?
Okay, thanks.
Interesting. And we just had a comment from Diana and Paul who said the Heptonstall Church had a smaller tower, so that might be factored in. But it is interesting, isn't it, thinking about the way that Saxton, of course, Saxton appears off the back of, as you rightly said, really the first major mapping project, and it's comparing that to nothing beforehand. It's tempting to think that he recorded everything, but something that we all need to bear in mind whenever we're using the maps.
Yeah, and he did. I think it's although he's put down, he's popularly seen as a pioneer map maker. I'm pretty certain that there were other kinds of maps before. I mean, certainly we know there are maps like it's called the Goth map, for example, from a lot earlier, and there are other maps that were available. And also there were manuscripts that described areas. So I think he had access to a lot of other sources, and he would have used those, no doubt. But I think primarily he did go out into the field and do the surveying himself. That seems to be the general opinion. And he clearly would have been helped by local people. In fact, he had letters from the court to request JPs to help him, or require, I should say, JPs to help him. So they had to go around and actually they had to appoint people to go around with him and point things out and show him where the high points were. How high he got up into the Pennines is very interesting.
Yeah, I wonder how. I mean, there's a certain point, I suppose, where how useful would it have been, but also then these professional curiosity at that point.
Yeah, but you've got to get up into the hills to actually see what's where, haven't you?
Yeah.
Murray, go on then. Murray was going to leave.
Yeah, Murray.
I mean, I was going to ask about the bridges as well, but so we can't get any further with that. But it does seem to me that he's including some places which we know were on significant roads. So Widdop Head, Stipenden, and Batings are all on very significant roads going into Lancashire. And they're not particularly in themselves, they're not significant places. No doubt people, there are houses and there are settlements, but nothing terribly significant, although there might have been, possibly there were some in Batings on the Blackstone Edge Road, may have been. So I wonder whether there's a way in which, by using the map and thinking, well, why did he include that? Actually, that tells us something a bit about what the road system looked like. Just a thought.
I'd agree with you, but that argument immediately falls down with places like Errington and Langfield being on it, because, well, unless you're suggesting there were important roads or routes going through those two. I mean, I'm sure there were routes, but nothing. I mean, through the middle of Errington, you won't have had a road going through the middle of Errington Park, for example.
Yeah. No, it's specifically on the Pennine divide, the ones I'm talking about, I guess.
Yeah.
But whether that applies elsewhere is just a thought. But I agree, Errington is really rather tiny. Batings is good.
Batings is, I mean, yeah, it's on the main road today. It's on one of the routes that crosses the Pennines. But all it isn't today is, I mean, I think, don't think it ever has been a very large settlement at all. But it was a significant spot being on the Blackstone Edge Road.
Mm.
Alan, I think you've got a question.
Yeah, it was simply, I was intrigued, you know, to continue from what you were talking about, you know, contacting JPs and so on, sort of point out points of interest. What scientific instrumentation had he available to him, or, you know, other mechanisms for accurately surveying? Was there anything in that era?
There was. It's interesting though. It is a time at which there is fairly rapid development of those sorts of things. And the chap John Rudd mentioned a bit earlier, the rector of Thornhill, and the guy who seems to have kind of given Christopher Saxton the main impulse, was very interested in map making and in the instruments that did it. And Christopher Saxton also had contacts with a chap called John Dee, who he's a very interesting Elizabethan character. He was called, was it Queen Elizabeth's magician, I think. And he certainly was a very interesting character indeed, who was another of these polymaths, more or less, and very interesting. And Christopher Saxton visited him when John Dee was living in Manchester, and they actually went together to Halifax at during, I think it was 1596, 1597. So there were instruments. Exactly what Christopher Saxton did and used, and we don't even know exactly how he got his how he drew his maps so accurately. It seems likely that he used triangulation, but there's no clear evidence, and sadly nothing has survived, as far as I know, from any of its kind of preparatory work or notes of surveys or anything like that, which would have given us a clue, which is sad, because, you know, it would really be nice to know how exactly how he worked. And as far as we know, he would have gone to the presumably to the principal JPs in an area, which at that time would have been, well, I think one of the Farrer family, who was at Ewood Hall, which is near Midgley, was one of them, or the Savile family of Bradley Hall, for example, were probably also, they were significant players at that part of the world at that time. And they would then have appointed presumably people from each of the townships to go round with Saxton and point things out to him. I mean, we might even be able to pin those kind of people down if we knew exactly when it was. And we're pretty certain it's going to be in the 1576 or 1575. The map is actually published in 1577. Be fascinating little task for Murray to undertake when he's finished his PhD.
That's good. Yeah, we'll assign some work to everybody who asks.
Well, we'll try, I think.
Yeah. It would really be fascinating. We had a comment just from Diana and Paul saying that we had a talk by John Billingsley about paths taken by people carrying coffins to Hepton Stall, and I thought they mentioned one across Errington, so that could be of interest, David, for you to follow up perhaps at some point. Has anyone got any other questions? I'm aware we're getting on to 6 o'clock now, but if anyone's got any other questions or comments, we'd love to hear them.
You've got one other thing I noticed was on the 1650 map of picture of the gibbet. In the background is the main way out of Halifax, going over to Wakefield Gate, Halifax Old Bank. And it's pretty accurate, actually.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
So that's a very early picture of a road.
Yeah,
this area.
yeah, it's one of the earliest illustrations, isn't it? I think. Yeah.
Good, excellent. I think if there are any more questions or comments, please do share them. Otherwise, I think we can probably let David go. Oh.
EB.
Jackie had a question about the name.
Yeah, which was, I assume, Jackie, you were asking about the magician. That was John Dee. If it was somebody else's name, then do say.
Yeah, one of the other ladies keeps putting her hand up to ask a question.
Oh, okay.
Oh, is it Elaine?
Yeah, Elaine, if you want to ask.
Elaine, you have to unmute yourself. Bottom left.
Yeah,
In fact, this is my very first time.
Well, welcome to the
Welcome to
online
Zoom.
world.
Yeah, welcome to the wonderful world. Go on, far away.
You mentioned the bridges.
Hmm.
Then you said that for some reason he hadn't marked any roads, and I know we've had some comments about routes and roads. Was that? Have you any idea why he didn't put roads in, or was it something again to do with the fact that they didn't want that information to be passed on to somebody else?
Yeah, I think that seems to be the most likely explanation, that they were nervous of giving too much away to the enemy. But if you show where bridges are, as part of it. I mean, at the crossings of the Calder at Elland, for example, and at Rastrick, which is another one which is on the map in that, are significant. He has quite a lot of the significant crossings on there. So, it's from that point of view, you can almost join up the dots or join up the bridges to get the routes on, which is, some people have tried to do that. Yeah, because I think it wasn't usual to put, okay, we're at sort of cutting edge here, really. It is the first detailed map of that sort that has really been drawn at that kind of distance at that time, over that kind of area at that time. So maybe the roadways weren't, they're not roads as we think of them today, of course. They're trackways, but some are, some are proper causes and some are proper ways. So, but it seems that perhaps it just didn't think that was important enough to put the roads on, to show where the main river crossings were. And he does show, I think, in fairness to him, he does show the main river crossings, apart from this obvious example of Halifax. And Halifax, clearly had river crossings. Yeah, it's a puzzle, right, as they say. People have spent a lot of time. If you go into some of the literature, which I've had great fun in the last couple of weeks going through, it's fascinating to see some of the arguments about why didn't he show roads, and what he was showing and for what reason. And this defence thing keeps coming up, that it's because of the concerns with, say, that Lord Burleigh had, and passed them through Thomas Sexford, and then which came down. They didn't want to give too much information on these maps, because of for defence reasons. Now, you can readily understand that in the south of England, and with the imminence of an armada, perhaps. Although, did they know in the 1570s? Relations were getting strained already, of course, between Elizabeth and Spain, Philip of Spain. Anyway, there we are.
Thank you.
Good. If anyone else has got or any comments, or likewise, you can put them in the chat and I can read them out.
Oh,
Cool.
I could make another comment.
Yeah, please.
About Elland Hall. I've never seen the photograph that was shown of the timber framing on the inside, but I'm pretty certain that those timbers were taken to somewhere near Wakefield and have since disappeared.
Yes. Yeah, they were said to have gone. They were said to be kept in one of the Tadcaster breweries, weren't they, for quite a long time? And the idea was that they should go up to perhaps the museum. Come on, brain, Beamish in the north of England, to be re-erected there. But the trail went cold, as it were.
Disappeared.
And someone has probably been warming themselves on the timbers of Elland Hall for a long time. Although actually, oak doesn't burn particularly well, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Not for that. Not for heating purposes, anyway.
Cutting it up into small pieces to put on your fire is not easy.
Good. Okay, thanks for coming, folks.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks very much, everyone, for listening in.
Thank you, David and Joe. And I didn't recognise Elaine, who I've known a long time, till she spoke. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jackie. Thank you for the kind comment in Twitter as well. That was
Well, I've just been
Good.
well, we've just been doing a map course for family history, and we started with Saxton, but although we didn't analyze it like you have, obviously, so it's really useful to be guided in such.
Right. Yeah.
Super.
Yeah. This project is brilliant. I mean, I'm now on Lancashire. Would you believe? I'm now working on Lancashire for this project. So it's all good fun. We've got there's about 8 of us working on the counties.
Yeah, I should keep watch. It's lovely.
Brilliant. You're not changing all the things around for Lancashire, though, are you, David? And just sort of making it up and
making it up.
Well, I don't know.
Excuse me.
Moving things around. I don't mean to insult your integrity.
Turn the signs round.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I was getting at. Yeah,
I see.
You know, make the settlements look a bit smaller and more sparsely populated. And the period is 1530 to 1680. We're covering. Sorry, Elaine.
I said it, and of course, spell them all incorrectly.
Oh.
Yeah, I think we've all had a bit of an experience of that, haven't we, with some of the ones that we were looking at for Essex that I gave a few thoughts on, that the spellings are quite strange. All across the country, we all get used to, don't we, our own areas, the dialects and things.
Yep.
Excellent. Right, I'm gonna end the meeting now. So thank you all very much for coming along.
Thanks for doing it, Joe. That was good. Yeah,
excellent.
lovely.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Dave.
Thank you,
Bye.
David.
No,
Brilliant.
pleasure.
Fantastic talk.
Thank you.